And welcome to Up to the Minute. It is Thursday. Welcome to October as well. October 1st. We've officially made it through October. 3 more months left in this crazy year of 2020. And Brittany Pacheco is joining us. We've got a half hour, great show coming up for you. But first, Brittany Pacheco with things on deck there. Good morning, Brittany.
Hey, good morning, Todd, and good morning to everyone joining us on this morning's edition for Up to the Minute. You all are in for a treat. I mean that figuratively and literally. So before we get into it, though, I do want to remind everyone to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget about our YouTube channel. You can also help us out by sharing this podcast to your personal news feed so that we can grow our audience. And let's just get into it, Todd. I mean, let's just get right into it. I'm so excited because this involves food. Let's do it.
It's good. It's, usually in this situation, we're in a studio, or in this case, we would be at our new culinary building and talking with the culinary program and getting a chance to, most importantly, taste their treats. But we can't do that today. We're doing it virtually. So we've got two of our chefs joining us from the culinary department, Chef Katie Rangel, who is joining us live now. And Chef, you're at the new building. I know you're preparing for students to come back in for the labs. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Yes, we're here in the new building in our demo kitchen, me and Chef Charles, and students come back on Monday.
That's exciting. We're going to talk more about that later. I know you've got some great treats to show us as well. And Chef Charles, you're joining us as well this morning. I know you're in the same area as Katie, showcasing off the new kitchen there.
Yes, we're both side by side, pretty much. We're very much social distance, but I'm here with her as well. Thank you.
We're glad to have you with us, and you've, I believe, got some pancakes getting ready to grill. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But first, we're joined by Leanne Potter. Now, Leanne Potter is joining us from the Library of Congress. Well, she works for the Library of Congress. I imagine she's at her home right now. She's the Director of Learning and Innovation for the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement. Welcome to the show, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Todd and Brittany and Charles and Katie. I am delighted to be here. And yeah, I'm coming to you this morning from my home in Maryland, but I do work for the Library of Congress, and I'm happy to say happy new fiscal year, 1st of October and all.
Absolutely. I had some time, I've spent some time up in that area over the past several years, and about 4 years ago, visited the Library of Congress. Incredible, certainly incredible. And folks, if you ever get up there, you need to visit them. Today is Virtual Family Fun Thursday. We feature museums and locations across the country, and including here in the Houston area. As mentioned, Leanne is joining us from Maryland, and you're talking today about a book called Cooking Up History. And this is kind of fascinating because you've going through and been able to grab some recipes from famous Americans and put them out there for people to try them on their own.
Yeah, Todd, what we did shortly after we all went home in March, we started identifying materials from the library's collections that could be of particular interest to families in particular who are home with their children. And we created a new web page on the Library of Congress's website. The library's website is loc.gov, and the website that we created is the Engage page. And we also created a families page. And so loc.gov/engage or loc.gov families, you can find a section that's called Cooking Up History. And a couple of the recipes that we identified from the library's collections of literally millions of objects were two of the recipes that caught the eye of one of your producers. One of them was actually a letter that Thomas Jefferson had written where he describes macaroni and his affinity for it. Unfortunately, the letter didn't really create a recipe, but it did have a fabulous drawing of something you could use to make macaroni with. And the other recipe that we had highlighted was Rosa Parks' recipe for Featherlite Pancakes. And I think that's what Charles is going to be working on today.
Yeah, we're going to get to Charles in a minute with those pancakes. I'm interested to see about those because those sound great. I want to go back to this letter by Thomas Jefferson and his fascination with macaroni. I would imagine in the time of Jefferson, macaroni and cheese or mac and cheese wasn't a dish you found on most colonists' tables back then. And it must have been something fascinating when you get a chance to try it.
Well, in fact, Thomas Jefferson was living in France at the time. You know, he was America's representative to France, and he experienced macaroni. And in this letter, he describes it and explains that it uses a flour, and he actually does say it's semolina flour. And he includes a drawing, really, if you've ever seen, you know, a pasta extruder, that's exactly what he draws in this letter. And actually, I think your producer has the letter. So if you guys, you know, can post it on your website later or something, I think folks would really find it interesting. It is available on the Library of Congress's website. But yeah, Thomas Jefferson, in many of his letters during that period, he's describing to whoever it is that he's writing to, whether he's writing to George Washington or he's writing to James Madison or he's writing to any of the other founders, he often describes observations that he is making about France, and not just political things like you might suspect, but he really does. He writes a lot about food and about wine and about books and about culture. And the fact that he does write about macaroni. Now, he's not writing about macaroni and cheese. He's just writing about macaroni. But I can't help but think that, you know, the cheese had to follow quickly. But that's a pretty fabulous document.
Tell us about, were cookbooks popular back then? I know we had something, I believe, from 1876 with a lemon pie photo, but tell us, were cookbooks a thing back then?
Well, you might, you know, it's funny. So I work at the Library of Congress. It's the largest library in the world. The library's collections literally go back millennia. You know, cuneiform tablets. I'm not sure any of those were cookbooks, but the earliest cookbooks that the Library of Congress holds really do date to the 15th century.
Wow.
And there's a collection through the library's rare book and special collections division that is a collection of more than 4,000 cookbooks that were actually donated to the Library of Congress by the husband of a woman whose name was Catherine Golden Bidding. And if you say, again, go on the Library of Congress's website, search rare books, cooking, you'll find this collection. And quite a few of those books have actually been digitized and have been made available in their entirety on the library's website. Some of them are in English. Some of them are cookery books from the 16th or from the 18th century. Some of them are in French. Some of them are in Italian. But these books, I mean, the notion of a cookbook really does go back hundreds of years. And what's really interesting when you look at that collection, and you know, you don't have to dig through thousands of cookbooks to see this. There are also blog posts on the library's website that sort of make it a little more manageable. Our science division actually has a blog that's called Inside Atoms, and they often write about these historic cookbooks and about other objects in the collections. Like you mentioned, the lemon pie, there's a whole blog post about lemon pie recipes. There's a whole blog post about pumpkin pies and Americans' affinity for the pumpkin. So really, I mean, there's so much to dig into.
Tell me, was it a thing back then? Were cities known as foodie cities like they are now? Like if you were, you know, I'm from New Orleans. New Orleans is known for its cuisine. It's Cajun and Creole cuisine, and it's famous for that. Back in the 1800s, 1700s, were people knowing cities and going to certain cities thinking, well, I'm going to get red beans and rice here, or I'm going to get a hamburger here? Was that a thing back then?
Yes and no. I mean, you got to keep in mind that most of, you know, we get excited today when we get to eat regional cuisine. Well, regional cuisine back then really was dictated by what was available. Yeah. And when you go back, again, you got to think about how today we take for granted that everything we could possibly want, any spice we want, any ingredient we need, we can usually get our hands on it. And the farther back in history you go, the less availability there was for every ingredient. So you need to sort of think about the geography of the place and what would have been available at any moment in time. Which is why, like I said, that blog post about the pumpkin is so wonderful because frankly, pumpkins were indigenous to New England. And when people started writing about pumpkin and what you could do with it, pumpkins weren't available everywhere in the world. It was actually one of the things that colonists, or that, when the English came to America and brought back pumpkin seeds and tried to grow pumpkin in England, they didn't have quite the same success as the pumpkin experienced in America.
What about presidential food? Is that something you guys cover as well? Because you always hear about presidents liking certain types of food.
Yes. So the Library of Congress holds the papers of 23 American presidents, and all of those collections have been digitized in their entirety on the library's website. Again, if you go to the library's website and you just go into our digital collections, you can find the papers of Calvin Coolidge. You can find the papers of James Madison. You can find so much information within those papers. And when it comes to food, it's interesting. Some of the papers have collections that were the collections of their wives, and that's where you tend to find more of the recipes. But you also find things like menus and invitations to fancy dinners. Not only dinners that were held at the White House, but dinners that those presidents were invited to. So again, if you're interested in culinary history, and it's more than just the recipes, finding things like menus, finding things like dinner invitations, and again, finding things like cookbooks. And when you were mentioning earlier, Todd, about the regional cooking, there's a whole section, again, the Library of Congress being the largest library in the world, one of the things we do really well is help people find information. And one of the ways we do that is through research guides. And we've got a research guide that is all about regional cooking. And I did a little poking around in it. There's a section, it's called Community Cookbooks, an online collection. And I went in there to see what I could find on Texas cookbooks. And I actually found a community cookbook from Fredericksburg, Texas, from 1921, I think. It might have been.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
It's very cool. And what's really neat about those community cookbooks is that, and as you guys know this, community cookbooks, sometimes fundraisers for communities or schools or churches, they include the recipe, but they also include the individual who submitted the recipe. So if you have family from Fredericksburg and you're curious, did your Aunt Mabel ever submit a recipe for a community cookbook? Chances are good you can find that recipe in that community cookbook. And there are hundreds of digitized community cookbooks that are referred to through these research guides. And if they're not on the library's website, they're available through the Internet Archives. They're available through other community archival institutions. And they're an awful lot of fun, not just for cooking, but for genealogy.
Yeah, well, Leanne, we're going to put all the links to your website where folks can find this information in the social media posts for the show. I want to bring in Chef Katie and Chef Charles, who've been working on two specific recipes, and they have the proof in the pudding, as you would say. Chef Katie's joining us right now. And Chef Katie, tell us about the cake you have and what it's based on as a recipe.
So the cake we have today is Alexander Graham Bell's wife, Mabel, and it's a very simple cake. She calls it 1, 2, 3, 4 cake. So it's got about a cup of butter, 2 cups of sugar, 3 cups of flour, and 4 eggs that are separated. So it's a basic creaming method. You emulsify the eggs into the batter. You alternate, add the water and the flour. It makes very light and fluffy, and then you fold in the egg whites at the very end. So it's a very light and fluffy vanilla cake. It does have vanilla extract, but it's very simple. What I really love about this cake is if anybody wanted to attempt it, especially right now during quarantine, you probably have all of these ingredients at home. It's very minimal. And it bakes very nice, very light and fluffy. And then I just used a very simple jam that I also had at home. You could use any flavor that you have and some fresh fruit. So nothing too complex or complicated, but pantry staples.
So let me ask you this. It looks like an angel food cake. Is that what it was called today? Is something similar to that?
I think angel food would be a little lighter, a little fluffier, more egg whites, but it's very similar. Very light and fluffy texture, but with the egg yolks and the creaming method, the butter, it is a little, it's a middle between pound cake and angel food is what it feels like.
Are the techniques used in that cake much different than they are now? Because I imagine that recipe was put together back in the 1800s. Were the techniques a lot more simpler or different than they are today?
They're very similar. We teach creaming method here at Houston Community College in many of our classes, but the folding in of the egg whites to give a little bit of volume and a little bit of light and airiness to the cake is a little bit more of a European technique that probably came over in the beginning. So it's a balance of the two, and a lot of times now we use oil, we use some additional ingredients, buttermilk, milk, that we have the modern convenience of storing on hand. So this is a very basic, fundamental type cake, but it's still very delicious.
Leanne, have you seen these recipes come to life in this shape and form?
Yeah, well, I love this. I think this is just about the coolest thing. I think this ought to be a whole show, frankly.
Hey, we've got an idea, you know, we've been thinking about that.
I love this. And I'm so tickled that you used that one. So the library holds the papers of Alexander Graham Bell, and his wife, Mabel Hubbard Bell. Part of the collection is hers. And she has a whole series of recipes in her hand. I mean, those are handwritten recipes. Yeah. So that's I think so neat too. And that recipe caught my eye because, again, I love to cook with my own children, and I love recipes like that. That notion of, I mean, it's such an easy way to remember a recipe. That 1, 2, 3, 4. That's wonderful. So I'm just so tickled. It's so pretty. I love what you did with it.
Thank you. Yes, her manuscript is so beautiful. I really enjoyed seeing the recipe and looking at the technique of how she explained it. It was very interesting.
Yeah, well, there are dozens more recipes from her. And the other thing that I thought was interesting about that one, and you mentioned using the egg whites, that recipe, it called for baking powder, I think. And that's interesting because baking powder is also a pretty important ingredient in that other recipe that we're going to talk about in a minute. Yeah. But baking powder is one of those things, it has not always been around. It was only created in like the mid 1800s. So I was sort of wondering, I think that recipe from Mabel Bell is probably from about the 1880s. And so it's maybe, a generation after baking powder was even available. Wow. So I thought that was pretty neat too. So I think, there's a lot, and what a fun way to learn history.
And Chef Katie, you tell me about the class that you instruct at HCC in the culinary program, because you work with pastries.
Yeah, so I teach some of the courses here at Houston Community College. We have everything from cake decorating, fundamentals of baking, to advanced pastry and plated desserts. So we teach a very wide array. We recently had a visit with the ACF, American Culinary Federation, and they said that in their viewpoint we're one of the top culinary schools in the nation because we go so in depth into our product and what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have students, alumni all over the United States and the world that are extremely successful. And our head pastry chef, Eddie Van Dam, wrote the book on baking that we use and that many culinary schools use. So we're very proud of everything we do here at HCC, and we're proud to be a part of this segment.
Well, we're proud to have you and Chef Eddie, and I know he's in the background there. And now we're going to move on to Chef Charles. And Chef Charles, you're doing a recipe that comes from civil rights icon Rosa Parks, and it's pancakes. I'm excited about it because you got pancakes and peanut butter. How can you go wrong?
Right. When I looked at this recipe, I was a little surprised because I had never put peanut butter in a pancake recipe. She also puts the oil in the pancakes as well. So I am going to spray the pan just with a little bit of spray before I put it in there.
Yeah, let's go get started.
Oil to actually cook the pancakes with. But it's very simple. It's 8 simple ingredients. It's dry ingredients, which is your flour, your baking powder, your salt, and your sugar. Those have all been sifted, and then I'm going to mix that with the wet ingredients, which is your milk, your egg, your oil, and the peanut butter. So I've got that ready. I'm going to go ahead and mix those two together and make up some pancakes, because from this, from this recipe, they only take a few minutes to make. So
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to talk to Leanne and ask her if you can go ahead and get started with that. We'll watch you doing that. And then Leanne, I'm going to ask you, how did you guys get a hold of Rosa Parks recipes?
Oh, it's excellent.
Okay.
So the Papers of Rosa Parks became part of the Library of Congress about almost 3 years ago now. And the entire collection has been digitized. And as you can imagine, Rosa Parks has a pretty amazing collection. Included in her papers are photographs, family photographs.
Yeah.
There are birthday cards that children sent to her on her various birthdays. There are notes related to the civil rights movement. There are what are almost like diary entries where she is describing the role that she played and the decisions that she made. But one of the other things that's really marvelous about the Rosa Parks collection is she took copious notes on so many unusual pieces of paper. So, and I this is interesting. In her papers, there are many, many, many church bulletins. She attended church, and often on a church bulletin, she would write notes. Sometimes the notes were about the sermon topic, sometimes they weren't. But so in her collection, you see Rosa Parks' thoughts often in these notes that she's written on the backs of envelopes. In fact, this recipe she calls them Featherlite Pancakes.
Yeah.
It almost looks like maybe she was having a conversation with someone and someone was describing the recipe to her and she was just jotting it down kind of quickly. And then that recipe has now, transferred to the library and become part of her collection.
That could be a book in itself, with this Rosa Parks thing. It's fascinating seeing, I want to see her thoughts during church sermons, and the things she's writing that aren't pertaining to the sermon. That's fascinating in itself.
Right. Or, what thoughts come to our mind. It's marvelous. And it's an amazing collection. And like I said, the entire collection has been digitized by the Library of Congress and is available online. And we also have recently, this time last year, the library had opened an entire exhibition on Rosa Parks that was called In Her Own Words. And that exhibit, unfortunately, because of COVID, the library, of course, had to close. Right. But the online version of that exhibit is available, again, on the library's website through our exhibitions. And you can explore those papers and really get a sense of who Rosa Parks was in really intimate and personal ways through these kinds of materials.
So if you're just joining us and you're wondering, we've got a chef making, it looks like pancakes. We're talking about Rosa Parks. What's going on? Well, this is a recipe, and Chef Charles is live at our HCC. He's at our HCC Culinary building, the brand new building in downtown Houston, and he's making some pancakes based on Rosa Parks' recipe. Chef, they're called Featherlite Pancakes. How's it coming along there? You mixed your wet ingredients with the flour and everything there, and now you've got them on the griddle.
Now I've got pancakes actually in the pan cooking. So we'll see. One thing I will say is it's very, the aroma of peanut butter is very much there.
So you can smell the peanut butter. That's very unusual. You said you've never heard of pancakes with peanut butter in them.
Not excited.
I know people, eat peanut butter on pancakes, but I've never actually seen the recipe where it's incorporated in the actual pancake.
Leanne, I see some type of maybe tie-in with a pancake house here with Rosa Parks pancakes. I think we got an idea here.
Well, they're wonderful. I have to say, when that recipe was first sort of discovered in the collection, and the library made a big deal out of it. I mean, we've got blog posts about it. It became sort of a story. I made it myself, and I got to tell you, those are the best pancakes ever. They really are. And not to put too much of a plug in for, I guess I have to say, like, if you use like a chocolate hazelnut spread on top.
Oh yeah. Oh man.
Oh man.
So Chef, how are they working out?
They're working out well. I'm just waiting for the bubbles so I can flip this pancake.
That looks great on the grill there, right there. Leanne, we've got Rosa Parks, of course. We talked about presidential. If you could think of one unique recipe with a unique historical figure that you could point out while he's cooking up these pancakes real quickly, would it be?
Well, again, if you go on the library's website, my advice would be there's a couple of different places. You could just go on loc.gov, go into the search and just type in recipe and see what you get. But the fact is, like most huge libraries or archival institutions, you really need to dig a little deeper. So if you're on the library's page and you go into the digital collections and you start poking around and you see, oh, there's Abraham Lincoln's papers.
Yeah.
I wonder what recipes would be there. Or, oh my goodness, there's James Madison. But the other place you can find not only recipes, but notes about food and about eating. George Washington, his papers are at the Library of Congress, and his daily journal during the Constitutional Convention during the summer of 1787 has got to be one of the most wonderful sources for sort of insight into food at that moment in our nation's history. Because, as you know, everybody at the Constitutional Convention had sworn to secrecy. They said they weren't going to talk to anybody other than the other delegates about what was happening. But George Washington, like many of the framers, he kept a daily journal. Well, if he can't write about what he's doing at work, what's he going to write about?
Yeah.
And he writes about food, and he writes about who he dined with and where he had dinner and what they had to eat. And his daily diary, of course, along with all of his papers,
Down in the lower, it's not
the library.
Well, food brings back such memories. And while you're talking about historical foods, I've got to throw something in there. I used to visit Williamsburg when I was a kid a lot. And then I recently had a chance to go back. My grandmother took me there when I was a kid, and she brought back the recipe for the Williamsburg gingerbread cookie, which is famous. They're famous for. And I remember eating that cookie when I was a kid that my grandmother made. And then when I went back to Williamsburg and bought one of those cookies, which they bake fresh on the property there, it certainly brings you back to those memories. So food has that connection with us where it's not only the taste, but it reacts with all the senses that it brings us back to a certain place in time.
It's such a good example. And you're right, those ginger cookies are fabulous.
Oh, I love them. You can order them now online, folks, as always, and I've ordered those as well and brought them back. So, Chef, how's it going with the pancake?
Interestingly, it is very light. You can tell as you're cooking it, it almost seems to have almost like a souffle type of feeling to it.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's because the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of baking powder, which
right.
seems excessive, but it's true. That really is what the recipe calls for, and that's what you want to do, because I think if you don't, that peanut butter probably would weight them down and make them not so good, but because of all that baking powder, they're really fluffy and fabulous.
That looks incredible.
The other thing I would suggest, though, is that you keep the heat down a little bit. I think with that peanut butter in there, you need to really do this at a low heat.
So the tip would be follow the recipe, but do it at a lower heat than you normally would make your pancakes. And wow, that looks great. I wish I was there with you, Chef. I look forward to seeing you guys in the new culinary building. And that's great. We appreciate you guys joining us this morning. Folks, check out our culinary program for HCC. We're going to have the link in this social media post. Chef, thanks to you for joining us. Tell Chef Eddie we appreciate him working in the background, and Chef Katie as well. We appreciate her.
They're right here. I believe they heard you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. And Leanne, we appreciate you being here as well. What a great show we've had today, and we enjoy talking with you.
What fun. Thank you,
so
Todd.
much.
Thanks, Brittany. And Charles and Katie, great job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. We are normally signing out around this time, but we're going to go a little bit long with the show so I can bring in Brittany to talk about our HCC news and information. Brittany, boy, that was a treat having everyone on the show.
That certainly was, Todd. And as I said yesterday about the pancakes with peanut butter, I know my dog, Luna, would absolutely love that because it consists of peanut butter. So
Yeah.
I got to
Unless
check
you
out
have
that
a
recipe
peanut
myself.
allergy, who wouldn't love pancakes and peanut butter?
That's true. That is very true. And I
Wow.
apologize if you hear any loud noise in the background. The landscape guys are here, doing their thing.
Oh, that happens. Yeah, that happens with these shows. So our HCC news and information, I know we're running a little bit long today, but that's okay. We're going to do that because we had some special things to talk about. But I want to get into our news and information, particularly Student Life, Brittany, because they've got a number of things going on across the district and too many to mention today, but we want to point them in a direction where they can find that information.
That's absolutely correct, Todd. So it's October. We're in a new month. There's a lot of things that are going on for the month of October in regards to Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So HCC students will have the opportunity to participate in various events through Student Life. You can check out their website by going to hccs.edu/studentlife for more information. But the best way to register for any one of these events is to check your emails, your HCCS emails rather, for the links.
Our virtual open houses, students, if you have questions, you're attending HCC and you want to know what's going on, or you know someone who needs to get into college and they want to get an idea of what HCC is all about, send them to our virtual information sessions through our open houses. We're having those online and they're starting this month, Brittany.
They are, Todd. So if you're interested in attending any one of these virtual open house sessions, you can go to hccs.edu/information sessions for more information. And they're going to cover a wide range of topics, including admissions, financial aid, and the new student orientation, which is mandatory for all students.
Virtual college transfer fairs. Usually colleges and universities are on our campuses. You've probably seen them before. They have the tables set up. We have transfer fairs where you could meet the representatives, learn about the college, and plan your future. Well, we can't do that in person this year, obviously, because of the COVID crisis. So we're doing them virtually, and they are happening across the month, over the month of October. So for more information, you can visit hccs.edu/transferfair. All the colleges and universities will be listed on there. There's a bunch of them. Check that out. We'll have that information in this post. Exporting your way to a brighter future, HCC's Minority Business Development Association is continuing their virtual export academy, Brittany.
They are. So the Online Academy for Entrepreneurs is allowing existing companies to develop practical hands-on training in exporting. So this is happening Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. a.m., 9 to 10:30 a.m. Let me correct myself. All the way through October 27th. They're going to cover a wide range of topics. To register, check our social media post for this show for that link.
Outdoor Wi-Fi zones. Are you having trouble connecting to the internet? Well, we've got some outdoor Wi-Fi zones. They're free to our students and they're available on our campuses. Now, the buildings may be closed, so you won't be able to charge your electronic devices or use the facilities. So you want to take care of business before you get there. But the parking lots are free outdoor Wi-Fi zones for our students. For more information on that, you can log on to hccs.edu/outdoor Wi-Fi. And if you have any questions, as Brittany will mention, the virtual lobby is available for you.
They are. So obviously we're still practicing our social distancing, but that does not mean that Student Services isn't here to help you. They do have live help via their virtual lobby in the form of a Zoom meeting, a callback option, as well as email. You do not need an appointment, but you can head over to hccs.edu/virtual lobby to put your name in the queue. You only need to register once. You can also check out the hours of operation and put in which option you'd like to be contacted with.
So that about wraps up the show for today, Brittany. But tomorrow we've got a great show lined up for you. Desmond Lewis will be here. You know, Desmond always has a great audience following him. Hopefully they'll tune into the show tomorrow, Brittany.
Yeah, Desmond is great. I mean, and such a very eloquent speaker. And he's the new dean of the College Readiness, part of the Academic Center of Excellence. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. But it also is Friday, of course, which means we will be joined by our College Operations Officer of HCC Northeast, Dr. Jimmy Adams. But to us on Up to the Minute, he is our resident poet. So he will be making his regular visit to enlighten us with his views and vision on the world around us in the form of poetry.
That's right. Dr. Jimmy Adams, Desmond Lewis, all that and more tomorrow live on Up to the Minute. We'll see you at 10 a.m. right here.